Hello, everyone, and welcome to Digital Forensics Workshop. We'll be talking about tools, law and secrets of digital investigations. If you love detective stories, you are in the right place in the right time. And I'm welcoming everybody who has joined this workshop, which I would actually call a podcast because there will be a dialogue between two very smart people whom I will be introducing in a moment. My name is Natalia Stashka. I've been working in EPAM for more than 10 years, dealing with commercial education, educational programs, and IT projects. And I'm here to host this uh, podcast. We'll be meeting each other and seeing how many of you have joined, and then I'll be passing the word to our speakers. And these people are not just speakers of the podcast today; they're also EPAM solution architects, and they are guest professors of EPAM University that delivers bachelor's and master's degree. We usually have a lot of questions how to join educational programs of EPAM, and we'll spend like about 5 minutes at the end of the show for me to answer your questions related to masters. However, the main focus of our meeting today is our guest speakers, and you can use the chat or you can use the Q&A section in Zoom to ask questions because after the talk, you will have a chance to touch the expertise and get the information from gurus in security. Who are they? Sergey, our security architect, the second level, and also the subject matter expert lead at EPAM, dealing with master's program in cybersecurity, informational security. And I'm very happy to present Leonid, who has joined us from the UK and is one of guest professors of master's program as well. And the show is on, guys. So, Leonid, Sergey, the ground is yours, and you're welcome to present yourself a little bit and chat about the topic which we have announced.
Thank you, everyone. First of all, greetings all. Thank you for joining. I hope you can hear me well. I'm very happy to be today here alongside with Sergey, Natalia, and everyone from EPAM's team who organized this webinar. And thanks for all the students for joining. I hope it's going to be a fun one. A quick intro, as Natalia already mentioned, I work for EPAM in the UK. I'm one of the security architects. I also lead the application security competency. And it also happened that I've spent some time in my life studying and basically practicing digital forensics. So today I'm here to share a bit of experience and provide a glimpse into quite an interesting, but at the same time complicated world of forensics. Sergey, over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sergey. I'm a security architect at EPAM. Primarily focus on cloud security architecture, but I'm not. I was close to digital forensics previous in my career, IT career, professional career. I'm very excited about digital forensics, and I hope we'll all enjoy today's webinar.
Righty, I think it's about time so we start sharing the screen and basically just give me a sec. Probably I will need to do it from the secondary machine because security permissions on Mac OS sometimes can do a bit of a tricks with our plans. Just to set a bit of expectations of what's going to happen today. So as Natalia said, it's going to be more of a podcast. So it's not going to be just your typical sort of first to the 10th slide show where we're just going to browse through whatever content we have and make it kind of a dry type of presentation. So Sarah here will ask me questions. You guys can also post your questions. So a bit of a disclaimer, this webinar is not going to prepare you to be a digital forensic analyst. So today we just show you the intro into the world of forensics. For those joining our master's program, this is where majority of the content will land. Basically, not majority, I would say 98% of the content will be taught. But today we're gonna talk about things like, for instance, the history of digital forensics. We're gonna show you a bit of a demo, that kind of stuff. Sergey, would you like to maybe say something while I'm dealing with the permissions stuff?
Yeah. So yeah, let me quickly give you a little bit of a heads up what we're going to see. So yeah, we're going to start with history. Okay, here we are. We're getting our presentation loaded. Yeah, just a few comments that digital forensics is a very complex field in security and cybersecurity overall. I don't know a single like engineer finishing the master's degree and becoming like a well-known in industry digital forensics investigator. You have to like learn and walk your path to that level. But again, our master security cybersecurity program will teach you all of the basics and give you all the foundations to become one. Yeah, so it's a really challenging field, really challenging. And we'll talk a little bit about that during the presentation.
Right, thank you, Sergey. I think we figured stuff out, so just bear with me a bit more. Sorry, guys. As always, that's why we called it a podcast, and we didn't call it basically anything else but it. All right, I think we can skip through the introduction and let's start with the history and the scope and the role of digital forensics. And I want to start with a very controversial quote that some people don't like, but unfortunately, this is the truth. And the fact is, despite digital forensic is traditionally thought as part of the cybersecurity programs, digital forensics is not security, unfortunately, guys. It starts when security fails. So forensics can help you with some tips and tricks and let's say operational procedures that you can use in cyber. And as a matter of fact, digital forensic can teach you a lot of stuff that you can use even in a daily life as part of your, let's say, the home operational security and the general like good practices of the digital hygiene. But forensics starts when security fails. So you need to understand this, that sometimes you might have workarounds and let goes and slide bys in the security, and those things will kind of mitigate itself. But when it comes to digital forensics, this particular field is built around the law enforcement procedures that you have to follow. And the reason being that is, and we will discuss it through some of the example cases that we're going to overview today. The problem is you never know when you will be invited into the, let's say, the room of court. So you have to adhere with the best standards and guidelines that digital forensic prescribes, which doesn't always happen in other industries. And this is a big difference between forensics and the general security. So what
I got a
is... Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I got a quick follow-up questions
Sure.
based on the previous slide. So since digital forensics is not a security and it starts when security fails, does it mean that security investigators is not part of the like traditional cybersecurity team within the organization?
They can be, of course. Let's say there's a common scenario in the large financial institutions, especially in countries like UK, Germany, a few other Western countries where you have like a really tight and largely expanded, like largely expanded financial markets that are tightly connected with the industries. Usually you have this sort of like forensic readiness by default, right? So, and this sort of prescribes that the team should have either their own digital forensic analyst, or there should be several team members within the security team who at least know how to do one of the most important steps in the forensic workflow, which is the acquisition and preservation of the evidence. So, yes, of course, if you have a cyber team, if you have enough budget, if you have enough willpower is the main part when it comes to digital forensics, like, trust me. Like, this is probably like answers your question that, yeah, digital forensic analysts should be part of the security team if you have a budget, if you have a resources. But if you don't have time or money for like a proper full-time digital forensic analyst, at least make sure that guys and ladies know how to preserve and like acquire the evidence.
And those capabilities should be part of the security operations team, I assume, for the incident response, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what I said basically on like on the first slide is that you don't have to be like a digital forensic analyst or investigator to actually apply certain techniques that you can use in the forensics. Like, for instance, a typical thing in the incident response, especially when it comes to the cases of malware, especially as we know, supply chain attacks, they are on the rise and there's more and more incidents related to that. So one of the a typical application of forensic skills that you can encounter is, for instance, sniffing the traffic and trying to the dumping traffic and trying to figure out where the communication from the malware or the C2 agent is coming from. These are the memory dumps if you need to reverse engineer behavior of the malware. And generally speaking, like incident response in the IT world procedurally is not different from like the incident response in the law enforcement world. So pretty much whatever techniques you're applying on the real life crime scene, you can apply the same stuff in your incident response. For instance, if you found an evidence or a sample of evidence, one of the first things that you can usually do is you will hash the object. And for instance, hashing is part of the validation procedure, which is one of the kind of cornerstones of like a properly executed forensics workflow.
Yep. All right. Thank you for clarifying that for our audience. Let's continue.
Thanks, Sergey. So moving to the next slide. So what digital forensics is, right? So forensics, first and foremost, is a scientific discipline. So digital forensics, it came out from the general criminology and the applied forensics in that field. So um, when I say it's scientific, it means that you need to follow the protocol. And most importantly, as in any scientific work, your work results must be reproducible. So if, let's say, you're claiming that we found that file of, I don't know, let's say we found an file that is an image, and let's say that image contains some sensitive visual graphics, let's call it this way. I'm just kind of trying to sort of select the right words here. You have to make sure that you clearly prescribe, that you're clearly describing, like, okay, this is when we found an image, this is how we recovered it, the visual verification confirmed that this is indeed what we're looking for, and so on and so forth. And by writing those notes and by following the protocols, if it happens that in a 2-year time or 3-year time, and it happens that evidence is only applicable in the room of court after several years, whatever analyst will do the cross verification, or if you are invited in the court of room for the cross examination, which happens to the forensic analyst from time to time, you have to make sure that whatever work you produced, it can be reproduced by your counterparts. Because if it's not reproducible, first of all, there will be loss of evidence integrity and it's going to be inadmissible in the court. But most importantly, this will cause a certain reputational damage to either yourself as a forensic professional or to the company or the organization you work for. So scientific repeatability and following the protocols is very, very, very important. So the main goal of the forensic, and here comes another controversial part when I tell people that you shouldn't study forensics through CTFs, because studying pen testing through CTFs or even red teaming, if anyone heard about like big CTF events like Standoff, where it's actually more than just your basic like web application pen testing, but it's rather like a full scale red teaming operation. Like for those type of activities, CTFs are perfect. But when it comes to digital forensics, there's one thing that I haven't seen a single CTF actually teaching it, is that the main goal is to extract, preserve, and analyze evidence in the manner that is legally admissible and forensically sound. And why CTFs are a bad idea is because they will give you a very interesting tasks and challenges, but usually CTFs will miss on the crucial parts of legal admissibility and making your report or your work forensically sound. So application of digital forensics, as we already kind of inexplicitly discussed, is that these are criminal investigations, cyber incidents, but there are 3 other very important and prevalent applications of forensics, at least in the UK. It's the legal disputes. Forensics is used a lot in these instances. There's internal HR and compliance investigations. So as a matter of fact, one of the financial institutions I worked for in London for some time, we had a mandatory forensic readiness discipline. So whoever was close to the trading processes, if the person was leaving the company, what we had to do is we had to preserve as much evidence of the last day of work of that person, meaning imaging their hard drives. Thank God we had virtual machines, so it was a bit easier. We had to do the live acquisition of the RAM, traffic, and all of that had to be preserved for a certain amount of years, because if in the future it happens that there was a mole or an insider in the company and it was just discovered after several years, that data, that preserved potential evidence. Why I'm saying potential, because preserved source doesn't mean it will contain evidence, but there's always a possibility that it will contain evidence. So that's why I'm saying potential evidence, because we can't claim that, hey, we imaged the drive, there will be evidence. This will also kind of put us in a bad spotlight and make some of our claims inadmissible in like legal institutions. But essentially, by doing so, what that organization does is they protect themselves from whatever compliance or like legal claims in the future, or if they have to do the legal claim, they can basically go to the compliance team, open the cupboard, and they will find a bunch of evidence bags, hard drives, and so on and so forth. So this is a very, very, very common thing. Just in case, when you will look at the slides, there are references to some additional materials. Please look at them. This is very good reading, and most of these materials will be used in the actual course that we're going to teach throughout the MSc program. Origins. Forensics is not a new thing. It's been around for a while. There's a bit of a controversy where actually the term digital forensics was established, but somewhere between like late 90s and 80s, when in the US and the corporate world and in the UK and in Germany and essentially in many other countries where societies experienced what was called the internet boom, the prevalence of the computer hardware in the professional workplace environment, it massively expanded. It was like a massive blast radius. And obviously, at some point, law enforcement, they kind of scratch their heads and they're like, okay, there will be a day when we will need to do the forensic acquisition of a personal computer from an organization, but we don't know how to do that. So in 1984, FBI have established what's known as COT, or Computer Analysis and Response Team. And basically, this was the first professional team of experts that was dealing with those sorts of cases. And this is why, referring back to what I said earlier, is that the best way to learn forensics is to learn forensics how it's done in the law enforcement world. Because believe me or not, if you just go and Google how to dump memory and how to analyze memory using volatility, you will get like 101 really well-written articles and white papers, and there are even the really, really, really long lab reports that were published on the use of similar memory analysis tools. But this will not give you this kind of proper workflow that digital forensics analysts are striving for. So with forensics, it's important to understand the procedural part, and most importantly, you have to understand the legal part, and we will dive into the legal part and why it is important. So following FBI, the UK Metropolitan Police, or known as Met, they also created the CCU under the Fraud Squad. Why under the Fraud Squad? Because one of the main exports of the UK are the financial services. So in many instances, a lot of things related to the cyber compliance, to the infosec compliance and regulatory stuff, it is somewhat evolving around the needs of the financial institutions. Hence, it was natural then that when Met Police established the CCU, it landed under the fraud squad and not under a dedicated cyber unit. They do have dedicated cyber unit now, but back in the days, this is where they started. Very important point is that during those like early days of forensics, forensic experts were more of a hobbyists, because there was no tooling, there was no procedures. They were procedures applied to the general physical forensics, but the volatility of the physical evidence, and we will talk through volatility and what it means in a few minutes, but it was very hard for them to sort of just start working on the typical protocols of the physical forensics. So they had to adapt them and they had to develop the tooling. So by the late 90s, after that, they were basically two acts established that kind of formalized the discipline. We're not going to dive into that part. Too deep, but late 70s and up to early 2000s, this is when digital forensic had sort of it's like a toddler or a teenager period. And essentially from that, we sort of now stepping into the era where people actually now scratching their heads and thinking about like, okay, can we apply digital forensics for cases of LLM abuse? Or can we actually apply LLMs as the forensic tooling? Short answer, no. Just short answer, no. Please do not try and do any conclusions about the found evidence with LLMs just because you will not achieve 100% reproducibility that will make such evidence inadmissible. And we will dive into how to use proper tooling a bit later.
Interesting. I wasn't aware that LLM should not be used during the forensics investigation activities. Does it mean that it will never be used, or at some point those like AI models will be adapted for such activity?
A very good point, and actually expected this comment. So the problem with the forensics is like, if let's say I'm telling the LLM like, okay, these are the IP addresses that we exported from, let's say, a pickup file that we analyzed in Wireshark, or let's say we had all the active established connections from the RAM. If we tell it like, okay, sort it out, maybe group it, this is one thing, because such result is highly to be reproducible. So whoever will, highly likely to be reproducible. So whoever will read your lab notes or contemporaries notes, as they also known, because in forensics you have to keep a properly structured and precise audit log for your investigations. If you write that stuff, it is likely it will be reproducible. So it's not going to be challenged in the court. But if we will tell, let's say, I don't know, you have a locally deployed Mistral 7B model or whatever model you're using. If, let's say, you will try to make a sense of the evidence or potential evidence that you collected and somehow connected to the background of the case, it is very likely that 2, 3, 4 similar prompts or the same prompt will give you different results. As we know that models can hallucinate from time to time, especially if it's general purpose model, if it's not properly like forensically trained model, then we might run into a situation when another forensic analyst will do the same and they will just get different results. So it's about like at what level you're applying that tooling. Let's say for your row aggregation, grouping, sorting of data, yes. For any sorts of conclusion making, like no.
Got it. Thank you for clarification.
Yeah, no worries. But I expected that question because it's a very kind of sensitive topic in the forensic community at the moment. And from what I know, there are a few labs that are working on a purposely trained model for forensics. Because there's like a global database of hashes of the files and digital objects that were already spotted once in, let's say, some criminal investigations. And basically the idea behind several labs is that what they're trying to do is they're trying to make that hash database applicable to the initial analysis of the evidence based on what was found. So essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to take whatever exists in autopsy and just autopsy is a forensics tool, not the process that coroners are going through. We're talking about different stuff here. But essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to mix LLMs and autopsy, pretty much. Cool. Let's move forward. Evolution of tools and practices. Again, 2000s. This is when the scientific working group of digital evidence was established. And these guys basically started working with NIST, and NIST actually has a program for the certification of the forensic tools. So any of you guys, if any of you guys are into pen testing, you know that there are essentially web resources where you can find a correct tooling for the correct situation or the correct set of commands for the correct situation, so you don't have to go through your notes. Pretty much the same for forensics. Then after that, NCASE was launched. The first, well, actually, right before that, NCASE was launched. That was the first professionally built, purposely built forensic tool. And then pretty much after that, access data released the FTK. So now this is not an access data. They were acquired by a different company, but FTK is still around. And this is one of the most widely used and widely recognized tools in the forensic world. So if you will write in your lab report that, hey, I investigated image using FTK, or I did an imaging, a bitstream copy using FTK, nobody's gonna ask any questions, because FTK is just like such a well-known tool, and same comes to volatility and other stuff. Interesting fact about volatility is that initially, so volatility is the RAM analysis tool, but before it was created, forensics was mainly focused on the hard drive imaging, because again, those historical ties with the physical forensics, and only later investigators kind of discovered that, okay, we also have RAM. We need to do something with RAM. Last but not least, moving forward, cloud era, IoT, so on and so forth. And this is exactly what I was talking about with my experience working for the financial institution, is that forensic tools, forensic capabilities, and forensic protocols are started being adopted by the commercial institutions. So what started as a group of hobbyists working for the FBI, now after like 2010-ish, started gradually getting into the corporate world. And obviously
I
with the
gotta
world of compliance. Yeah. Please go on.
Yeah, I
Sir.
got a quick comment here. I remember using Access Data FTK. It was the Access Data at that time, like in the early 2010s, like 2011, 2012 maybe. And then kind of interesting to see that it's still considered to be like an ideal tool, and pretty much the only tool to use for hard drive imaging, right? Another quick question to you, Leonid, while we're here. So about the RAM analysis. So you mentioned that the RAM analysis appeared only not that long ago. Does it mean that like before the digital investigations like didn't analyze the RAM at all? Meaning that the attackers, perpetrators could have hidden themselves within the memory, not leaving any trails on the hard drives. And
No, not really. So if you look at if you look at, for instance, when the coffee by Microsoft, I think it was created like in early 2000s as well. It was more of a the original forensic work. At least this is what I know from more senior colleagues who work for Metropolitan Police. Is like initially it was more about like your typical cases that somebody claimed that they stole an IP from the company. The potential suspect claimed, no, I didn't steal the IP. They deleted stuff from the hard drive, and then it was about like carving files and recovering files, that kind of stuff. But when the first, let's say, massive raise in the malware activity started happening, this is when sort of we started diving into more of this. The professionals started diving more into this kind of cybersecurity oriented forensics, where you actually had to deal with multiple variables in the equation, like hiding presence of the malware in the memory by, let's say, replacing the processes and so on and so forth. So obviously there was RAM forensics. Obviously there was other stuff like stereography and the spectral analysis forensics and stuff. But like it was more of a like if tools did exist, they probably existed in the individual labs and on the hard drives or USB drives of individuals. But like Coffee from Microsoft was like this first kind of publicly available tool. And obviously, when Volatility Foundation was established, then it just became a whole different game. Because these days, it's more about analysis of the traffic and RAM. Because in most cases, forensic investigators in the corporate world, if there's an actual incident response, they will deal either with the C4 beacons, or they will, sorry, C2 beacons, or with the malware, and they will less deal with the disk analysis. So obviously now RAM has a bit more prevalence over the imaging, just the basic imaging. But yeah.
Hey, and just a quick comment to our audience here. Don't be frightened by all of the like professional jargon you're hearing from Leonid. All of that will be taught in digital forensics class in our master's program. So don't be afraid to hear the words you don't full understand right now. All of that will be covered.
Yeah, guys, as a matter of fact, you'll get a glossary. So
Yes.
yeah, you will get a glossary like yeah.
In digital forensics specifically, there is like a special jargon that are not really used like anywhere else in cybersecurity. So there's quite a few words you'll need to kind of get better understanding.
Very much, very much. It's a very good comment, Sergey. Thank you. Alrighty, let's move forward. We're not gonna stop on this slide for too long, but like these are just the examples of this is just the example scope for digital forensics. So it's important to understand that digital forensics isn't limited to computers. And when I say computers, I mean like laptops, your desktop PCs, all-in-ones like iMacs and stuff. It just happened that originally forensics was just targeting these devices. But if you look at forensics these days, and actually, we will look at one particular very famous case in the US where digital forensics was like really the cornerstone of the investigation. Forensics has moved way above and beyond just your typical desktop and laptop computers. Now it covers smartphones, tablets, IoT devices, drones. Actually, drone forensics is one of the rapidly growing disciplines. I tried to get into this a couple of years ago. Very interesting stuff, requires a lot of time and a good amount of drones because you can't really just mimic that stuff. And also, forensics now covers like cloud services and virtual environments, and actually many more. So sometimes it's about the hardware forensics and hardware forensics. We're not going to teach hardware forensics in the course. We will explain what it's all about because hardware forensics is a discipline of its own. Like if we dive into hardware forensics, then we need to dive into the microelectronics, the working with the radio equipment and stuff. So like we don't want to kind of explode the brains of all students within the very short time span program. But as you can see, forensics can be applied to pretty much anything that creates digital evidence. And evidence sources, files, documents, your logs, your memory dumps, network traffic, metadata timestamps, um, LNK files, like the link files that are usually created on the file system level in Windows when you just open some artifact, being that the document, the Excel spreadsheet, your favorite cartoon images, even those tiny little files that mean nothing to the real user, to like the end user in forensic world, they basically can make a difference between a suspect being convicted or the suspect being let go. And practical contexts where forensic is applied, criminal justice. Two very prevalent examples in the UK is child exploitation and cyber fraud. These things are always investigated by the Metropolitan Police, especially the first category. Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, these type of crimes are quite prevalent in certain big metropolitan areas. As a matter of fact, when I finished the module for digital forensics, I remember that my tutor in the uni, he actually asked whether I would like to join Metropolitan Police, but no, I don't want to. I've spoke to a few forensic analysts in the past, and there's one thing doing corporate forensic investigations. There's absolutely different thing doing the law enforcement forensic investigation because you never know what type of material you will encounter. And this is why in the law enforcement world, people have all sorts of like the risk mitigation factors, such access to psychiatrists, psychologists, limited work hours, and so on and so forth. But this is your typical application in the criminal justice. Corporate security, like I said, insider threat, data leaks. That's why many financial organizations, they want to be forensic ready. Incident response, malware infection. This is exactly what Sergey was talking about. The APT attribution that usually comes from the analysis and reverse engineering of the malware. And regulatory compliance, so GDPR breach analysis, if happened that somebody leaked out data and that was a personal data and that is a violation of GDPR, so usually a mature organization will have some sort of like a forensic readiness attributes present in the organization to satisfy regulators and to essentially prove that the blast radius is smaller than expected.
In a few words on it, I'm just wondering whether digital forensics these days also applies to self-driving cars or capability of self-driving cars. So let's say it was hacked, right? Somehow, and we know there are like available hacks, and it was in the past. Like, do current modern digital forensic investigators cover those cases?
Yes, I mean, if drones are covered, I don't see why cars are not covered.
Yes.
But as a matter of fact, a few years back, I came across a white paper where uh, researchers discussed actually the existing tooling and existing hardware for incident responses to actually dump all relevant data from a Tesla.
Wow.
So if there was a white paper written on that, and as you know, in the scientific world, white papers are not created out of nothing. This is usually there's either commercial or the governmental interest behind the topic. I wouldn't be surprised if there's actually some company somewhere in the US or somewhere else that just has a forensic ready tool for Tesla or whatever for a
Yes.
couple of $100,000.
And just to reinforce to our audience, so I see the digital forensics covers lots of domains, and not just traditional computers and servers, including cloud, right? Workloads. It also covers pretty much everything that uh, basically process digital data, right? Digital information, and plus, in this case, like how to like conduct a proper digital investigation on like a hacked self-driving capability of a modern car, right? You can just understand how much knowledge you have to possess before doing something like that. And obviously, the specialization in digital forensics world, it also dives into specific like domains. I'm pretty sure that people that do like drones forensics or the automobile forensics, they probably don't do as much as Windows Server 2016 digital forensics in Azure Cloud, for example, right?
Yeah.
So there's some focus areas in each. And I remember like a quick reiteration just to staying on the topic of hacking cars, right? I remember when I was in a video like 10 years ago probably, when a modern car, I think it was BMW, like pretty much brand new, right? The guy who was sitting like 15 meters away from that car was able to hack into a TPMS system, which is a tire pressure monitoring system, and basically injected the payload through the ECU system of the car and took control of the car. So it basically proved right down the scene. So it was like done as experiment that brand new cars like that you buy from dealerships, right? They are not safe as you might think, right? So they were able to hack the ECU unit, and they were able to turn the wheel right during the riding. Nobody was in the car at that moment, but they were able to basically steer the wheel for the driver. And you can imagine what damage you can cause by that, right? It's
Yeah,
just one of the
absolutely.
example.
That's
And
why.
those TPMS units essentially, as far as I remember, were just a simple Bluetooth 3.0 version
Yep.
devices, and so the hack was through the Bluetooth protocol itself, and then they were able to get to the ECU system and inject the payload there.
Guys, that's why I buy diesel only mechanical. Don't resort to Teslas. Just don't do that. A good old 15-year-old Volkswagen diesel only, the best. All right. Just to be cautious with the time, let's probably expedite through other slides because we also want to show a bit of a kind of real life forensic workflow. So, core functions of the forensic investigator, we will discuss that part in depth because it's very much linked to the legal aspects of the work. But essentially, you will acquire evidence, meaning that extract it or potential evidence. You will preserve it for whatever time is required. You will analyze it if required. Then you will write a professional report. And sometimes it happens that you need to do an expert testimony because people in the room of court, they don't know, they know nothing about your work. What they know is you collected some information that might help them to make a right decision in the court of law. So testify is something is a phase that we will also cover, and this is actually one of the advantages of our program. If you look at many professional digital forensic training programs across the world, like they don't discuss not just the legal part, but they don't discuss how to basically behave in the court, how to like present your evidence, and how to react on the questions from, let's say, the counterparts and another expert witness or defendants or prosecutors, doesn't matter. So we will cover that as well. Just sort of a bit of a glimpse, when I was studying digital forensics, we actually had this really cool part of the final project, which was the students from the law faculty, they played prosecutors and defense. And we, as guys who studied digital forensics, we were actually invited, and that was also in the format of the webinar. We actually had to show that our work was done the proper way. So this was like the real like expert witnessing in the court. But yeah, we're gonna cover that in the course. We're not gonna cover it up to this extent, like I just said, with exercises with guys from the law faculty, but it's gonna be fun. Role in the investigation lifecycle, we will also go through this in the course, but essentially it all links back to those 5 stages. So during the acquisition, you will have to identify, preserve, acquire. You will have to analyze, you will have to document and do the reporting. I will show you a little bit how the documentation looks like through the hands-on demo. And basically testify, or a presentation or a testimony is also part of your typical role in the investigation lifecycle. It doesn't matter that you will go through all those steps in the lifecycle. Sometimes it's enough for you just to acquire stuff. Let's say if nobody wants to press any charges, they just want to acquire stuff just to keep it for whatever reasons. Sometimes you will stop on the documentation reporting, especially in the corporate world. I've seen some cases when corporations press charges against people, but normally when the evidence is too compelling, there are some kind of background negotiations happening, and usually you don't have to go to the court unless one of the parts is really opposing to whatever agreements were established in case of the incident resolution. Okay, now to the important part, legal admissibility of digital evidence, and this is what I'm going to show you throughout the demo. Evidence must be accepted by the court. I always hear this comment that I'm not going to go to the court as a forensic analyst. You never know. First of all, you never know. You never know whether the image of a drive that you bitstream copied 2 years ago will be required tomorrow. So you have to make sure that when the time comes, your evidence is legally admissible. Core legal requirements in the UK. Why in the UK? So UK is one of the countries that has one of the strictest, and one of the hardest to comply with forensic protocols. So the ACPO guide that we'll go throughout the course. So ACPO is the guide that was created by the Council of the Chief Police Officers in the UK to basically guide digital forensic analysts. You will see how many requirements are there and why the process is so strict. But essentially, it divides into like 4 parts, which is authenticity. So can evidence be proven to be what it claims? Meaning that, hey, this is a memory dump. Can you prove that it's a memory dump? Yeah, it's actually written in my contemporaries notes. I run dump it, and now I can analyze it with volatility, and this is a hash sum. This is like a very rudimentary example. It's a bit more complex in the real world. Integrity. Integrity is very important. If we remember the CIA triad, the 3 main properties of the security, integrity is also there, and integrity is very important for the forensics. So has the evidence been altered or tampered? And I will show you why it is important during the demo. Relevance, basically, does it directly related to the investigation or not? Very tricky aspect, because there is like a rule of thumb or unwritten law just to collect as much as you can, but simultaneously there's always a risk that, let's say, if you're working with a shared workstation and that workstation was, let's say, used by 3-4 users and only one of the users is the suspect, then imaging the whole drive may result in, let's say, someone's personal data now being part of the evidence. We're not going to talk about whether these people should use their workplace provided hardware for personal stuff and stole, let's say, photos of their kids. That's a different conversation. I'm just talking about the cases that really happened when a disk image was done and one person claimed, I had my personal information there. So then there's the whole re-imaging process and so on and so forth. And reliability, like I said, reliability is important. Is your investigation technically sound and properly interpreted? But reliability also links back to repeatability. If you can't repeat the investigation, it's very likely that it's not going to be reliable. And supporting principles for that: chain of custody, contemporaries notes, and using validated phrasing tools. Forensic investigators, when you're getting involved, we already talked a little bit about it. It's kind of a duplicating slide, but essentially, if you want to pursue career in law enforcement, you will either land in forensic lab in the police or cybercrime units, or in certs and intelligence agencies. If you go private sectors, cybersecurity consultancies like EPAM, incident response teams, legal and expert witness roles. You can be a freelancer actually. If you have a really good reputation in the forensic community, you can just do kind of the testimony for other people. It happens from time to time. And corporate and internal teams, if you land as a forensic analyst in a hedge fund or a private equity fund, it's very likely you will be part of the compliance team. And in some cases, you will be part of the internal incident response team, provided you are mature enough organization to do so. Example of modern digital crimes and hybrid evidence, wearables and fitness data. There are plenty of cases related to Fitbit and Garmin. OSINTers also love wearables because you can collect a lot of telemetry about the people's moving back and forth. Smartphones, messages, crime evidence. So smartphones, yes, you will have to do imaging of a smartphone, but it's much easier to get a court approval and get access to the cloud account and get information from there, because most data that is stored on the phone is likely to be stored in the cloud, same photos and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that smartphones are not prevalent in the forensic investigations, they are, but personally, I haven't encountered that much in my professional practice. IoT and smart devices, again, exactly the same. So IoTs and personal variables are exactly the same. They generate a lot of telemetry, they store a lot of telemetry, and that is a really good source of potential evidence for the forensic investigators. And obviously, the forensic cross-correlation, basically when multiple data sources were involved and multiple types of digital evidence were involved, and you have to cross-correlate, this really helps the investigation. So there are references to all very interesting real legal and crime cases. I highly recommend you to read through this. It will be very beneficial before you starting the program. We're not going to stop on this slide because we already discussed what digital forensic does for cybersecurity. But guys, just to remember, in forensics, you will learn the workflow and the protocols that will help you to correctly and safely do your work in incident response, threat hunting, and so on and so forth. Forensics is more about that and less about tooling, because it's much easier to go and Google how to use a particular tool than how to use a particular protocol. Introduction to forensic workflow. Alrighty, we're gonna start with the most important part and introduction to volatility of evidence. There are several types of acquisitions that you will do. Sometimes you will have a dead machine in front of you, meaning that it was powered off. Sometimes you will have a powered on machine, meaning that it's a live system. And based on that, you will have different types of volatility of evidence. So for instance, RAM is usually acquired the first. Why? Because if you shut down a server, a virtual machine, whatnot, the RAM will just disappear because it's flushed, right? So, but RAM can contain processes, loaded DLLs, which is especially important for investigation of malware and how the presence of malware was hidden. This is what Sergey referred some time ago. So RAM is usually acquired the first, right?
Active
so
network connections as well, right?
Pardon?
Active network connections as well.
Yeah.
To C2 server, for example.
Yeah. You can actually, I will show that in the volatility example when we will actually see what processes establish what ports and so on and so forth. But typically speaking, like data that can disappear if the system was shut down is volatile data. So you have to acquire it first, if possible. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes you don't have jurisdiction. Specific example, RAM dumps require access to kernel level. If it requires access to kernel level, you need to have admin level privilege. Sometimes you need to get a court order or warrant. Sometimes just a CISO or compliance officer can sign it off straight away. In many cases, it just doesn't happen. So for whatever reasons, if there's an incident, people don't want to give admin privileges. And in that instance, we resort to non-volatile data. And non-volatile data is basically your hard drives, your USBs, file system metadata, log files, and everything that is preserved once the system was shut down. In the course, we are giving reference to one of the NIST's standards that has a very well-defined volatility level. So just remember, like, whatever can disappear needs to be collected first, and this is like the best sort of a kind of guesstimation of what you need to focus on.
I got a quick question,
Sure.
like really quick one, but I think interesting one on this one. So imagine the situation where there's a like active web server, right? Server the traffic, like so maybe it's a e-commerce website, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the SecOps identified then that that specific server is under attack at the moment. So
Mm-hmm.
the incident response team gets involved. What should the digital investigator do as the first step? Shut down the machine and image the hard drive, or do the RAM like dump the RAM first, so on a live machine. But we know that the attack is ongoing.
Well, if attack is ongoing and we're talking about the perimeter breach scenarios, I must assume, one of the first things in the incident response is to minimize the lateral movement, right? So typically, what you're going to do is you will kind of shut down communication with the affected unit if you know that, okay, this particular server is really affected. So this is what you normally do, because if there's a C2 agent or an active malware, it will still try to communicate back. So you can still try and dump the traffic. You will just see the sort of the failed communication, but you can still sort of establish a connection between NAB, between like, okay, where it's trying to communicate to. So usually you kind of isolate the machine, then you do the RAM dump, then you do the traffic sniffing again, then whatever CPU caches, if you can extract them, sometimes it's not possible. And after that, if you know that, okay, we have a RAM dump, it specifically tells us what process and what executable or DLL was used. We know where communication was going to. Then basically at that point, it's basically safe to say, okay, we can shut it down now, and we can just proceed with the dead acquisition and the long
Mhm.
lifespan evidence. As a matter of fact, when like the UK ACPO guideline, it prescribes that communication has to be shut down safely. So, for instance, if you are investigating a smartphone, one of the first things that investigators do to preserve whatever evidence is here is they put the device into the Faraday cage bag. So, device remains active, but there's no connection going back and forth between whatever
Mhm.
source is there. And a lot of those like forensic Faraday cage bags, they actually even have the built-in battery pack, so you can put the phone in, plug it in, so it kind of remains active, because smartphones are like 80% of the time, smartphones is live acquisition. And then in that bag with the shutdown network connection, you basically put it in the forensic lab. And yeah, I hope it answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
No worries. Again, guys, volatile versus no volatile data. Like I said, if it's lost in power, it's volatile. If it persists after shutdown, it's non-volatile. So this is how you need to work on your timings and risk of loss and whatever tools you have. It sometimes happens that you don't have enough tools, frankly speaking. Sometimes you don't have a physical write blocker. Write blocker is one of those devices that allows you to block writing to the source, or allowing writing to the source. Usually, for instance, if it's a RAM acquisition, what's happening is you have one of those fancy devices. In one of those, you put your USB drive with your dump it, and another one, and you put it on read only, and another one, another port, you have another USB that is writable, and then you connect it to the system. And this is what allows you to, let's say, safely dump the RAM without installing additional software in the system. But sometimes it's just not happening because you just don't have relevant tooling. And the only thing you can do is just to preserve as much as you can with whatever you have, because you can't do the job if you don't have a right tool, right? So it's also kind of cost versus risk, and whatever capabilities do you have. And obviously, handling difficulties, live acquisition is always very difficult. So, live acquisition is usually done by the most senior people in the team, and the dead acquisition is usually done by people in the lab, because it's just easier to control in the lab. There's less stressful factors than on the actual crime scene. By the way, a bit of a sneak peek into the course that we will teach during the master's program. We will also discuss how to behave on the crime scene. because it is very easy to contaminate physical evidence on your hard drive or on the exhibits that will contain potential digital evidence source. Because you are working on this intersection between the physical and the digital forensics, we will teach you basics on how to behave on the crime scene. We already talked about live and dead acquisition, so we're not going to stay on this slide. Yay, demo. So we're going to do, we're going to show you how to handle evidence, what contemporaries notes are. We're going to show you the storage imaging, quickly talk through the key evidence that's contained in those artifacts. We will basically show you the RAM capture process, and we will show you the key evidence that are contained in the RAM. And to start with this, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. Sorry. And we will start with these guys. So this is your typical evidence bag. This is a typical evidence bag that is used in the UK for the law enforcement. And what it contains the chain of custody. The chain of custody is information about where this hard drive was collected. Obviously, this is not real evidence. This is just to show you how the process looks like. But usually you will receive this bag. And like I said, because you're working on the on the intersection between the physical and the digital world, you will also need this, your gloves. But we're not going to use gloves today because I'm at home and it's kind of non-ventilated in the room, so I don't want my hands getting sweaty. But usually what's happening is, let me actually share my screen once again. Why did I stop sharing? Yeah. So what's usually happening is you have this evidence bag. It contains all the information about who collected the exhibit, not the evidence. We're going to collect evidence, where it originated from, who is the suspect, who was the collector, and time when this exhibit was recovered. And sometimes what you always also do is you're writing down some information about the device. So first thing first that you need to do is obviously you are opening the evidence bag. Sorry, I got my scissors here. So you open the evidence bag. And the important part now is the chain of custody now is not intact anymore. So what you have to do is once you will finish the work with this, you will have to take another fresh evidence bag and you will have to copy all the information from this to a new one. And then you will have to put a note here saying that the bag was opened by. And why is that? Because in the courtroom, they will ask you, why did you open the bag? And you will say, well, I opened the bag because I had to make an image of the drive with the potential evidence. And the next question will be, did you preserve the chain of custody? And preservation of the chain of custody is essentially saying that we took that from the crime scene, we packed it, it was secure, it was protected, nobody altered it, so integrity is preserved. And then we investigated it, but then we put it back and we made a note that it was opened, it was resealed, and most importantly, once you're done working with the evidence, the old evidence bag goes into the new evidence bag. And this is how you preserve the chain of custody. And chain of custody is what will ruin down the first defense of the counterpart, or the first rather attacking method, saying that you tampered with the integrity. So this is the first thing. The second way of how you can be challenged in the courtroom is by saying that, okay, you preserved the object, but how can we make sure that you preserved the actual integrity of the digital sources contained there? And here we're talking about the write blocking. So not many people actually know, but you can. Sorry, how to remove this part? But you can actually block the automatic mounting of the drives connected to the system, meaning that the file system or antiviruses or indexing that is used in many modern file systems for a quick search of the files in the UI, it will not alter the last accessed timestamp of the evidence. So in Windows 10, Windows 11, just by opening the folder, it will not alter the last access timestamp of a file. But in earlier systems that are very much prevalent in the corporate world, there's a lot of banks that are still working on Windows 7 and Windows 8. I'm still encountering instances of Windows XP in certain governmental institutions. It might happen that if you put a USB drive or just a drive into your forensic workstation and the write blocking was not enabled, if the indexing or the antivirus activity is happening, it will start changing the timestamps. And if it changed the timestamp, that means that you are tampered with the original state of the potential evidence, and that will be probably the most effective attack line on you from either prosecutors or the attorneys. Depends on which side you're playing. So now I'm going to plug that stuff in.
Yeah, let me clarify for the audience here that it doesn't mean that the content of the file was modified. It means that the metadata, which is the timestamp, is modified, and that evidence will not be admissible in the law of court anymore. So this is really important.
Yeah, precisely, Sergey. That's a very, very, very good comment because, guys, once again, the potential evidence can be anything. It can be the content, it can be the metadata, it can be literally anything. Yeah, and brilliant.
And your Fitbit case later on will uncover some of that, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, I just plugged in the drive, and as you can see, it basically shows as the device, but it's not actually mounted in the system. So to mount it in the system, I'm using the FTK imager, and what FTK imager does. So you guys probably know that if you pop in the USB drive, it kind of runs the autoplay by default in the system. So it'll pop up the file explorer screen and so on and so forth. It didn't happen. Why it didn't happen? Because device was mounted to the system, but it was not actually mounted as the file system drive. So usually what we do in FTK, we're just adding the physical drive. And basically, this is how you work with your evidence. And you can either start looking into whatever data is located here, or in many cases, you will use FTK just to create the disk image. And from that, you will do exactly the same. You will select your drive. You will select the destination, which is usually another hard drive that will either land separately or land in the same evidence bag. Quoted as image, original source, image. And then essentially you will just click start and the whole process will create forensic image that I will show you in here. So forensic images have different formats. It can be RAW, it can be DD, it can be EO1, EO2, standing for ENCASE. All of them can be accessed either by the FTK or a more sophisticated framework, which is Autopsy. We're actually going to go through Autopsy throughout the course. Basically, when you take that file image and you put it into the Autopsy, it will show you not just the data source and the file system of its own, but what it's going to do, it will actually show you what file types do you have by extension, by MIME types. You can do, hopefully there will be something that we can look at. Yeah, in some cases, it will do the preview of a file, so you don't have to restore the file to do visual verification, because restoration of a file sometimes can lead to the criminal conviction of the forensic analyst, and we're going to go for this in one of the cases that we can discover in a couple of minutes. But essentially, once you correctly handled the evidence, you plugged it in, it wasn't auto-mounted, it wasn't altered, metadata wasn't altered, you go through FTK, you basically create image, it creates your image, and then you can either put it into the Autopsy or you can preserve it. The brilliance of using Autopsy is that it will immediately show you all the key kind of potential evidence that you can work with. And if we look at the key evidence type originating from the storage images, this is usually your registry hives that can be accessed through Autopsy. It is your Windows event logs, shortcuts like LNK files. So again, LNK file is a shortcut that is created on the file system level for every file that was actually executed. It's kind of like a symlink pretty much. And then you have your browser and internet artifacts and user data and deleted evidence. browser artifacts. One of the reasons why I love Autopsy is because it has a really, really, really good representation of the browsing history. So you don't have to use any other tool. It will basically show you what browser database the record is coming from, what was the URL, data access, and so on and so forth. And this is really useful in many cases. Browsing history is one of those types of evidence that will prove the intent. So in the criminal law, especially in the Western kind of legal system, to prove that someone did something bad, aka committed crime, you need to take into account two things. You need to take into account the malicious intent, or in Latin, it's called mens rea, or you need to prove, and also on the top of that, you need to prove that the malicious act took place, or actus reus. So actus reus plus mens rea, malicious act, malicious intent. Only these two, if proven that being present at the time when the crime was committed, can prove that the suspect is actually a criminal and not just a suspect. And the web browsing history is one of those things that will usually prove the intent. If, let's say, a person, I don't know, committed the distribution of, let's say, the child pornography, and if they had, even in the browsing history, a specific search queries, and if we found such kind of images on their hard drive, I mean, this is clearly mens rea plus the actus reus. So it's very easy to kind of prove both of those aspects, the act and the intent. And this is basically how the working with the images looks like. So important part that I haven't showed yet is when you work with the forensic investigations, there's one thing that you need to do is you need to put your contemporaneous notes in place. So what is contemporaneous notes? So contemporaneous notes is a thing that helps you to protect yourself in the court. So for instance, yesterday I made this note in a tool called case notes, that evidence received in evidence bag. So by demonstrating you how to attach this drive without actually adding an extra note that exhibit 001 was removed from the bag and connected to the workstation in read-only mode, I already kind of tampered with the evidence. So if you don't have like a proper audit log of all your actions, it is very likely that your actions will be inadmissible in the court of law. So these contemporaneous notes, all these like tiny little, all these kind of tiny little entries that you will do here. So for instance, I packed the evidence and continued chain of custody. This will, for example, preserve the physical integrity of the evidence, right? So it's important to write the case notes, because case notes will save you in the future. Didn't happen to me, happened to a colleague whom I know. Incorrect case notes almost lead to a prosecution, but very sensitive case. We're not going to discuss it here. Now let's move to the RAM acquisition. So I'm not going to demonstrate the RAM acquisition itself because it's a very easy process. You just run the tool, it just dumps the memory. That's it. The more important, or rather most interesting thing, is what you can discover from the memory images that you're using. So let's say this is one of the memory images that we're going to use throughout the training. And let's say we have a task of figuring out what processes were running at the time when the RAM dump was created. Hold on, sorry, my bad. My bad, guys. I used the wrong command, as always.
Yeah, it was a Linux style command, right?
Yeah,
Python.
because I tested it on Linux as well. So essentially, by the way, if you are running a command and the command was not executed correctly, you also need to go back to your case notes and say, I ran the command. You have to paste the command, and then you have say, it errored because incorrect tooling was used, switching to win specific comments. And that will also preserve the integrity of your work, meaning that whoever will pick up your work after you, they will know that, okay, it doesn't work on the Linux, it works on Windows, or incorrect command was used, or do not use that command, and so on and so forth. So literally, even every single error that you're making during investigation also needs to be documented. Yeah, that's it. So yeah, what you can find in the RAM is actually very helpful for malware stuff. For instance, the list of processes. Or, for instance, if you found the process that you want to investigate further, what you can actually do is you can say DLL list and see whether any particular process was responsible for, let's say, accessing any DLLs. And this is how you can do the cross-link correlation. In some cases, you can even find the hash dumps of the authentication tokens, or, which is more important thing, and this is kind of a gray area in the forensics, you can find a keys to open up the BitLocker. Because sometimes what will happen is you will encounter an encrypted drive. And if you will make an image of that encrypted drive, you will get nothing but the binary data. So what you need to do is you need to decrypt it. How to decrypt it? If the system is live, if you do the memory dump, and if it's a Windows machine, and if it's a corporate environment, it is very likely you will have a key there. But in some jurisdictions, reusing that key will be considered as hacking. And in the UK specifically, by doing so, you can violate the Computer Misuse Act of 1995. So please make sure that if you are about to do an action that kind of feels sketchy and you have that gut feeling that something might go wrong, go to your legal representative, go to your compliance officer, go to your senior forensic investigator and just tell them, hey, do we actually want to access that encrypted drive? Do we have the jurisdiction? Do we have the authorization to use that key dumped from the memory? And if they're saying so, if this is really required for investigation, if this is a heavy case, just use it. But if not, don't do this. Just don't do this. What else? Another actually interesting part, which is not applicable to all images, because images are taken from different files, from different operating systems, so volatility will not work with all the modules that it has. But CMD. CMD history is a great stuff to prove that someone did something wrong on the system when they have an admin level, because this is essentially your history of the command line executions. And it's very sometimes logging in the corporate environment configured in the way that executed commands are not actually logged, because people do a lot of actions, and this is one of the things that's usually filtered out. But if you have a fresh memory dump from the exact time of the incident, then you can easily prove that a certain action was done on the command line level, even if the person claims different, and even if there's like no active like kind of mentions in the system logs. So
even though the perpetrator might have hidden or erased the traces of their CLI commands, entered CLI commands on the hard drive, right? They will still be available in memory. That's why like RAM analysis, RAM dump is really important.
Precisely. And yeah, so basically, this is just like this table contains that like key evidence types that we just described. So you can export your command line history. You can export like the network connectivity stuff. You can exploit. You can export like all the DLLs. You can just go through the processes, ports that processes have established. So from just one memory dump, you can actually get a lot of information that might contain potential evidence. Again, guys, don't be biased. If you're investigating something, treat everything as possibility. Don't treat stuff like, okay, I know for sure that this is like an evidence, because you never know. This is not up to you to judge whether this is an evidence or not. You're just presenting results of your work. And yeah, as always, before we proceed further, just to kind of clean up what we just did, I will detach the drive. I will put the drive back into the evidence bag. I will seal that bag, and we will pretend that it was returned back to the police station intact. So this is how you work with your evidence. Now, let's quickly spend a couple of minutes on the, sorry, let's start from current slide, on the risks and legal challenges. Sorry, guys, Zoom is my menace. So, real life cases and real and legal and practical risks. So, forensics is a sensitive thing that requires a lot of like legal procedures. Like I said, I already violated integrity because I didn't make the contemporaneous notes because I did certain action and I didn't document it, right? So it represents a certain legal risk. So first of all, let's talk through the real life case. And one of the famous forensic cases is the Fitbit murder. In 2015, Richard Dabate, who is known to some people who are into the forensic world because it was like one of the first large cases of Fitbit being admissible as an evidence. That last name is known. Otherwise, we will refer to him as a suspect. So he called the police station and claimed that the masked intruder has broke in. So the suspect's story was intruder subdued him with the zip ties, demanded valuables in a depth, Vin Diesel-like voice. This is a very interesting way how he plotted this. Then that intruder chased his wife, who is a victim, into the basement and shot her. So initial impression, Ellington, high crime area, invasion gone wrong, right? Now, this is when the suspect claims went the separate way with the digital reality. So suspect's timeline claim was that victim returned home from the gym, intruder appeared almost immediately and killed his wife. What the Fitbit data showed, though, is that the victim was still moving around nearly an hour after Richard, or suspect, claimed she was dead. And the Fitbit data proved that she walked over 1,200 feet in the house, which is actually quite a lot of steps. So as you can see, there was a differentiation, there was a discrepancy with the timeline that kind of proved that investigators need to dig deeper. And when they actually dug deeper, there were also CCTV cameras, there was like stuff on the phone, other stuff. He tried to tamper with the physical evidence, so probably to clean up the crime scene. And the tampering of the evidence in this case happened not on the digital level, but either on the physical level. And without that correlation between the digital evidence and the physical evidence, the investigators wouldn't be able, they weren't be able to basically prove that the suspect killed the victim, so the husband killed his wife. That's why when I'm saying that why we are teaching on how to behave on the crime scene is because we don't want people to basically step into the role and then, let's say, a hard drive that potentially contains the fingerprints of a suspect and the suspect was not on the scene were destroyed just because like you didn't use the gloves. So this is very important. You see, like the physical evidence can be staged, but digital timelines are far harder to falsify. And trial and conviction. So the case happened, as you remember, in 2015, right? But if you look when the conviction happened, it was in 2022. So it's like 7 years. That's why it is very important to preserve evidence intact. That's why all these bags, they have this chain of custody. That's why we put the previous bag into the new bag. That's why we have all these notes, all these audit logs. That's why we're doing all this kind of anti-tampering, write-blocking stuff on the file system level. Because you never know when the incident starts and when the actual conviction will happen. As you can see, the evidence was preserved for 7 years until the actual conviction has happened. That's why following protocols, it's very important in the forensic world. Legal risks. Especially in the UK, forensic analysts can be prosecuted by just not following the protocol. And it's not about someone will realize that they didn't follow the protocol. It's about what's going to happen when they will be cross-examined. For instance, possession and distribution of illegal material can happen unintentionally, and we will discuss the case on the next slide. Data protection breaches. Again, the infamous scenario when 4 people used the same computer, but only one user profile was of a suspect, but the whole drive was imaged, meaning that there's a potential data protection breach because there was a personal data. Again, contamination of evidence, why we are write blocking, because we don't want to alter the metadata, which will be already considered as an admissible source of evidence. And chain of custody failures. So like I said, If you don't put the correct chain of custody, that thing will not be admitted in the court. Practical risks. Human errors, technical missteps, overconfidence in the tools, resource limitations, professional liability, it all comes with like part of the job. That's why it's always nice to just consult and know the correct workflow and just talk to more senior people in the team. And if you're not comfortable with, let's say, doing live acquisition, just say, I'm not doing live acquisition. And you're perfectly in the right of doing so. So do not allow anyone to pressure yourself, especially in the highly stressful situations of incident response, with doing something you're not familiar with. And last example case, when the CSAM recovery gone wrong. So CSAM stands for the child sexual exploitation material. This is the category of indecent images defined by Interpol. Scenario, which was a real scenario, but I can't disclose the case because that scenario was taught to us by our tutor in the university. Essentially, what happened is an analyst was recovering deleted images from a suspect's drive. During the triage, autopsy wasn't able to do the preview of an image, so analysts decided to recover an image. The image was recovered. It was verified that it was a CSAM content, but what happened is the analyst has deleted the file, but didn't mention in the contemporaries notes that I have recovered for the sake of verification, but it didn't contain the record that I deleted it. And under the UK legislation, what happened is that person created a copy of a CSAM material, meaning that it was copying and distribution, meaning that in that case, it was very hard for the forensic analyst to not end up in the jail. He didn't end up in the jail. There was a lot of scrutiny around, but yeah, this is why procedures are important. Thank you. I hope it was entertaining. Now, I think we have some time left for Q&As, and I believe that Natalia, you also had your blog that you wanted to present.
Leonid, thank you so much. You are doing magic because both you and Sergey are stealing me from project management. It sounds tough to study forensics, but very exciting. And while I'm answering a few questions related to masters, I'm giving you a few minutes, guys, to look through the questions in Q&A and in the chat, and I'll give you the ground in 3 minutes, okay? So far, I'm sharing my screen and checking if you can see it. We have the questions in the chat. What's the program about? We are talking about the program that it's master's degree in cybersecurity or informational technology, where both Leonid and Sergey are developing the courses based on all international standards, as Leonid, Sergey are guest professors of ITPU University in Tashkent, the first online university in Uzbekistan. And one of our master's degrees is cybersecurity with 2 directions, cybersecurity architecture and cybersecurity management. Digital forensics is taught in both fields. Definitely, if you've been in IT for a while and you have your degree, it's the time to think maybe you need to refresh what you knew because everything is changing so fast. And if you don't study now, make sure that you're confident about your job security. So studying these days, if you are in IT or if you want to join IT, is about studying or restudying everything you have known before. As per our program, why I think it's a good one, it's taught in academic university, which is online, by practitioners and guest professors who are 100% involved into the industry. It absolutely opens up career prospects, provides you with state diploma and EPAM certificate. It lasts just a year and a half. The price you can see on the screen, and we do it in English, which means that you not only get the fresh knowledge about cybersecurity, you also practice, and you're available to be working in any corporation of the world. And in case of having more questions about master's degree, please fill in the form which now will appear on the screen. And I'm not stealing any more time from our experts. It's much more important. If you think about studying with us, starting from the end of September, just leave us your comments and leave us your contact details, and your personal consultant will get back to you and chat about the program. And I'm giving the word back to Leonid and Sergey to answer the questions both in the chat and in Q&A.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to read the first question from Sophia. What's the extent of crossover of the course syllabus with CFE? CFE, I guess, stands for Certified Fraud Examiner. And if there is an agreement about CFE certification to count master's credits towards the CFE. I guess I'll try to respond to this. The course syllabus is based on best industry practices, best digital forensics practice, as well as personal experience from Leonid. In this case, because Leonid is the author of that course, so he'll be basically passing all of his knowledge and skills to you, right? The certification, I don't think the certificate will be part of the course, right? So, but it will definitely prepare you to pass one, right? I'm pretty sure. As I remember, when I was learning the digital forensics, it was not as deep in knowledge and practical right skills as our course will be. But during that class specifically, I passed the Access Data FTK Imager certification, which like it was very easy based on the course content. In our case, I'm not sure if that certification is still around or how CFE stands against that, but you'll definitely be prepared after our course. And the same thing for IC squared and SACA certifications. It will not like give you a ready to go certification from those sources, right? But it will definitely prepare you better for the exams.
There's quite a few questions in the chat window, not in the Q&A. Yeah, so it's actually the good one. Can you advise in the following process? How do you prepare a report for lawsuit to extract information from cloud storage on the internet? How to do it? How do it this process? Thank you. With cloud devices, okay, so there is a gray area because if let's say you have your OneDrive or Dropbox or whatever cloud storage you're using mounted locally, it will have the synchronized files, meaning that that is already part of the file system. If something is not part of the file system, if let's say something hasn't been synchronized and is just still sitting in the cloud storage, that means that usually you will have to either get access to the personal account of the suspect or the organization. In case of organizations, easier because it's an incident response. So usually you get a sign off from compliance and you just get access there. And then basically is the same stuff of, okay, like this is the account. This is the list of files that we have. This is the list of files that we have discovered there. So usually if it's like S3 bucket or something, you can calculate the hash sum there. Then you can download the files locally saying that the files were downloaded for the sake of preserving, and then you calculate the hash sum and then they're matching. And basically, even if the files will disappear from the cloud, they're still preserved. So if it's a person, individual, you will need to have jurisdiction to access their personal account. If it's an organization, this is basically usually. How you prepare a report for lawsuit, exactly the same thing. So you're writing the audit log, you're saying why you're accessing it, who gave you the sign off, under what jurisdiction, what files and artifacts have been discovered, what are their hash sums, how did you download it, how did you preserve the evidence that you acquired from the tampering. So that's why I mentioned that on this course, we will take a heavy focus on the process and the workflow and how to integrate tooling into the workflow and not workflow into the tooling, because like this is the wrong direction. I hope it answers. We have a few more stuff. Nowadays, many people's phones are being silently infected with malicious malware. The big question is, can we actually track down and identify the people behind spreading this malware? It is very hard because there is a thing called malware as a service. You don't have to write your malware. You're just paying people. They're running that stuff for you. Usually, it's the insider stuff that basically breaks down organizations like Lockbit or Anonymous. As you probably know, Anonymous that are active these days, they're not the same Anonymous that were several years ago because the core part of the group was prosecuted. But it's actually very interesting stuff that it's not just the malware that is infecting the phones. As a matter of fact, there were precedents of people buying the USB storage drives from the some of the well-known marketplaces, let's call it this way, and they were already infected. So malware is everywhere, and like one of the things that digital forensics, for instance, teaches as part of the technical aspect is write block, do not auto run, do not auto mount. For example, by just focusing on those things, you can already kind of at least cut off one of the vectors for the potential infection. What else? Today I noticed one thing. When we buy a new laptop, after 2 weeks working with the laptop, the command line opens by itself. Turns out that new laptops are in. Yes, exactly the same. Refurbished hardware, it's a big problem with the refurbished hardware, with the secondhand hardware from eBay, buying cheap stuff from known marketplaces. I'm not going to name the country, but we all know where it's coming from. Buying from untrusted sources quite often lead to unexpected results. It's the same as buying, I don't know, the original bottle of a whiskey versus, I don't know, the cheap secondhand copy from, I don't know, the back alley. You never know when you get the poisoning, right? Encryption protects users, but it also shields criminals. Where should we draw the line between security and access for investigators? And this is where we're talking about the legal jurisdiction. So here's an example. In the UK, there's an act called RAPA, stands for RIPA Act, which is the Regulatory of the Investigators Powers Act. What that act stands for is, let's say, if I know that suspect A and suspect B, if I suspect that suspect A and suspect B, let's say, conducting some illegal activity, let's say they're talking about human trafficking, but the communication is encrypted, right? So can I break the communication? No. Technically speaking, no. I mean, unless I'm NSA or GCHQ, which is the signal intelligence in the UK. But what I will do in this case is we are going to the Home Office, and the basically the head of the Home Office in the UK can sign off the potential decryption of the traffic, and then with that thing, we will go to the ISP providers. The same with the example of a BitLocker. If we found the key and we extracted key from the memory, if this is really needed for the investigation, yes, we can get a sign off. But in some cases, it's not going to be possible. That's why it is important to know the type of the evidence and the type of the challenges that we are facing with every single potential source that we are encountering. And this is what we're going to talk throughout in the course. Yeah, that's about encryption. So good evening. I'm in DFIR. I'm new in DFIR. I'm very interested about vehicle forensics. Lynn, could you please recommend any source, open source information like books? Personally, I'm more into drone forensics. I can and there's not much information about drone forensics. Just Google, like literally, Google is your best source. White papers.
Are there any working groups or forums available somewhere, like the team, maybe some Discord channels?
Yeah, there are several channels in Discord, but they are kind of semi-dead. What I found is like the best advice and the best information on forensics, I personally found, and it will be very controversial, on Reddit.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I know Reddit is kind of this weird child where you can get a very useful information or like some absolute I don't know, ridiculous data that can't be even proven where it originates from. But this is where I found it. The thing about our course is that like for those who will sign up, you will learn from the very first slides that we will provide you with a lot of information on where to do your extra studies, like your self-studying on the top of the contact hours, on the top of all the labs that we're going to do. And I would say like 98% of the information that we're using there, with a few exceptions that are not mandatory, is the open source information. So my best word of advice here would be just go and try to look for white papers. So specifically go and type automotive forensics white papers, because if there's a white paper, from the white paper you will find the names of the authors, and then you can look up for more works from these authors, and maybe you will potentially discover community that they belong to, or maybe like a lab or something. So this is how I would do it probably. Please let me finish my third year. Okay, sorry. Yeah, master's degree. Yeah, Eunice, word of advice: do not study masters until you've properly finished your current program.
For sure.
Trust me, don't do this. We are sure you will manage, and we will be happy to. Okay, sorry. Oh, do you think AI can even replace human forensic investigators? No, no, never gonna happen unless AI will get the human consciousness. That's it. That's it. Because any sorts of forensic investigations, any sorts of activities that somehow connected to the legal system will always rely on those little things in the human psychology that AI will probably never pick up, because it's also about the psychological aspect of the forensic work. So personally, if it will ever happen, I'm not gonna likely see it. So probably it will happen like in 50 years time or 60 years time, but not today for sure. But yeah, AI, like I said, is definitely one of the tools that we will potentially use in forensics, but not now, maybe in several years time. Any other questions? No, I think that was the last one. Thanks everyone.
Yeah, I think you covered all of them.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. That's been hilarious and awesome. And I'm amazed, I'm sure, the same as our visitors. So this is not our final workshop webinar podcast. Guys, please follow our channels of communication, both in Instagram, LinkedIn, and in Telegram, and join other workshops we are preparing for you. And I see there are many people who registered for consultation with your personal consultant to ask questions about master's degree, to be the part of this fantastic community who is striving for excellence and keep studying. Like as we keep saying at EPAM, we work during the day and we study in the evenings, because that's how we can keep ourselves needed and posted and updated, and make sure we have our jobs tomorrow. So join the club if you want to be with us. And I'm really grateful for all of you who have joined the meeting today. Thank you. And that's it for today. Goodbye.
Thanks everyone. It was fun. Take care of yourselves. Don't forget to use your gloves. Always use your gloves. Thanks all. Bye.